I'm just great. Oh yeah, really good guy, local guy. He said, "I'll be over tomorrow at 9." Here, no, but then I walk out the front door just going to walk out.
So Jeff said they were going to get rolling here.
Get the front light switched for the. They have the light out in the front yard.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Happy New Year.
She's like, oh.
And on behalf of the Village of Cary and the Board of Zoning, Planning and Appeals, I'd like to hereby call this meeting to order on this Thursday, January the 11th, 2018, at approximately 7:35 p.m. We have a quorum of members, and at this time, I'd like to ask our Director of Community Development, Mr. Simmons, to please call the roll.
Commissioner Jasper?
Here.
Commissioner Kretschmer?
Here.
Commissioner O'Loughlin?
Here.
Commissioner Graziano?
Here.
Commissioner Pippin? Commissioner Williams?
Here.
Chairman Corey?
Here. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, everyone. So welcome back. Let me just try to set the table for us tonight so everybody knows who everyone is. To my left, your right, this is Joan Hollop, who's recording our meeting. So welcome back, Joan. Happy New Year. And you may recall to my right here is Mr. Simon. He's legal counsel for the Village of Cary. And this is Director Simmons. And I think some of you may have met us previously at previous ZPA meetings. So gentlemen, I just want to refresh. I know we've had a little bit of a gap between when we were together last. You might recall that this original application came before us on November the 9th.
Right.
And the request was made to extend it to a new date, which became December the 14th. And you recall that during that meeting that we mutually agreed to carry that application forward once again to get some clarity around some of the questions that were being asked. I think you know from on your dais in front of you tonight, you would have received some additional communication regarding the application. I personally, for the record, want to state that I received this information at approximately 4:21 p.m. Central Standard Time today via email from Mr. Simmons. So Mr. Simmons, thank you. And I think we'll probably review some of that information further. But before we begin tonight, I just want to make sure that I answer any questions in advance of our proceedings from the ZPA members or from council.
Just a reminder that the public hearing is still open. We have not closed the collection of evidence. And so we are still accepting more information relevant to your deliberation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that's a great comment, Mr. Simon. And so by way of background, again, in terms of the process, I'm going to ask Mr. Simmons to give us an overview of where we were from last time. We may have some additional questions from Mr. Simmons. We'll then subsequently turn it over to yourselves to make your additional requests. Once that's closed off, we may have some questions for yourselves again. I think you're familiar, Mr. Lung, how that process works. We'll open it up to the public. If anyone has any questions or comments, we'll do our best to respond to those. Remember that the public comment section is really for the public to comment and not necessarily designed to be a back and forth between yourselves and the question or ourselves and the question. But we'll be flexible. And then once we close that portion of our meeting, the ZPA members will take consideration of the application. A vote will be taken and obviously delivered back to our elected officials. So that's the process for tonight. And thank you again for a reminder, Mr. Simon. That's very helpful. So with that said, I'm now going to call case number ZPA 10001. This is in fact for PI Telecom Infrastructure, LLC. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Simmons for an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just a kind of refresher summary of the proposal. The subject petition is reviewing a conditional use for a telecommunications antenna at 30 Northwest Highway. The slide, which is currently shown on the display, indicates the location of the property and also the location of the tower on that subject property. This slide indicates in further detail the construction drawings that would show further the location of the cell tower, leased area, and then also the construction of that tower that would potentially have the approval for up to 4 antenna installations on the single monopole installation. A little background further on the hearing schedule. Obviously, we've discussed this project previously. Originally, the public hearing was scheduled for October 26th per the petitioner's request. That was continued without discussion during that evening. The main crux of the review of this petition was held on November 9th of last year, where the staff report was presented and also additional information was provided by the petitioner in support of their petition. Based off the discussion that evening, the item was continued to a future date to allow for additional documentation to be submitted that would provide responses to 3 additional areas that the ZPA had expressed a desire for additional information. That was continued to December 14th. Again, was asked for continuance by the petitioner for additional time to present the information. And then this evening would be the second hearing to review the proposed petition. As of this afternoon, as Mr. Chairman had mentioned, staff did receive some additional documentation that was provided to the ZPA was provided in the dais this evening. The petitioner has provided additional support for their proposed conditional use. Little further background on the November 9th continuance. The 3 items that were requested to be reviewed further are highlighted on the slide. In summary, first was looking at the ComEd right-of-way and the existing high-tension power lines that are existing there. The board and staff had requested that the petitioner determine if co-location on these adjacent towers was not a physical option that would be supported by ComEd. As the board may recall, previously the village had reviewed prior installations on those towers, which were supported by ComEd. Ultimately, one was approved by the village and one was not supported by the village. However, there was history as far as allowing the installation of tower co-location of cellular equipment on those towers. And the request was that a determination from ComEd be provided whether that was an option or not for co-location. The second request was reviewing co-location of existing towers or water towers that are in the area to review if the service gap, which is alleged in the petition, would be satisfied if more than one existing colo option was installed. That could be a combination of either 2 existing water towers in the area, a water tower, or the existing monopole that is existing along Main Street, or possibly even the ComEd right-of-way if that were approved. The request was to provide additional information to see if the service gap could be satisfied in lieu of installation of the proposed monopole. Third and final request was to provide additional documentation or response to how the proposed improvement for the monopole installation could be installed, which would sustain the ability to allow for future redevelopment of the cutoff property area. The petitioner in the response, which was received a little bit earlier this evening, has provided some written response to as far as speaking towards potential options there may be towards that development or how it would not restrict future development. But that is information they provided today. As the board may recall, staff at the previous meeting and the staff report had recommended that the ZPA in the subject case make findings of fact that the application did not satisfy the standards for conditional use, that 2, there was an existing conflicting evidence of whether a significant gap in coverage exists in the area, and 3, insufficient evidence has been presented to demonstrate that co-location cannot be used to satisfy a gap in coverage if one exists. Staff recommendation, still based off the information that's provided, is similar to what was presented before. I'll be happy to answer any more questions you may have, but I'd like to give the opportunity for the petitioner to also provide additional testimony for the information they provided this evening, and also the information as far as furthering their requests tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simmons. Before we proceed further, gentlemen, does anyone have any questions at this time for Mr. Simmons?
I only have one. If you could, or maybe I have it here. Trying to remember, should the ZPA recommend approval of the request, staff would recommend the approval be subject to the conditions as listed in the 10/26/17 staff report. I don't have that with me. Can you refresh my memory on those, Brian?
Sure. should have been in the documents received. but-
Yeah, I can't find it here. I went through
I was
everything.
looking for the same thing, Brian. Let me double check.
Yeah, I just need.
It wasn't in the packet that we got last Friday. Let me double check.
Yeah, it should have, if you received in your packet the agenda for the previous meeting,
Previous meeting.
yeah,
Yeah,
it was one of the items that was in that.
yeah.
That's all I wanted. Yeah, I wanted.
Yeah.
He had a copy. I just
Okay,
wanted to refresh it in my head.
Sure.
I thought I brought that with me, but I guess I did not. Oh, no, here it is. I do have it. I do have it. Sorry.
Does anybody else not see that document or have questions on that? That's
No.
them right there.
Gentlemen, any additional questions at this time? And Frank, did we assuage the concern that you have?
No, I couldn't remember what they were, so I just wanted to refresh my memory, and I do have them here in my packet.
All right, unless there's any other questions, I'm going to turn the floor over to the petitioner. So at this time, Mr. Long, if you would like to, or Mr. Carter, if you would like to present, it's up to yourselves.
My name is Michael Long. I'm counsel for the petitioner.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. I'm with the law firm of Hush Blackwell up in Milwaukee. And with me to my left is my colleague Rod Carter, also with Hush Blackwell.
Welcome back.
So-
And welcome, Mr. Carter.
Is it possible for me to go back can I use this computer here?
I don't see why not, but it's not mine, so I don't want to speak for someone else. Yeah.
Okay. We sent a letter to Mr. Simmons this afternoon addressing the items that are on the screen right now, which were the three items that the ZPA asked us to review at the November 9th meeting. And Mr. Carter and I would like to address these three items. And what I'd like to do is take the third one first, if you don't mind,
Absolutely.
which is the redevelopment issue related to what the applicant could do to more or less ensure that redevelopment of the parcel could take place. And in this instance, really the best thing to do is to reduce the square footage of the fenced-in compound that would be, put around the perimeter of the tower and any ground equipment. And when looking at our proposed site, we've got the ComEd right-of-way that forms the western boundary of the parcel, and we have leased basically a piece of property that's adjoins and shares the same boundary with the right-of-way. And in looking at this, I've got a diagram. I can show you more or less what we could do here to reduce the footprint. But the goal would be, if you guys have the survey of do you still have the survey of the property handy?
Yeah. So gentlemen, I think for your reference, I know I have an iPad with me, but this was, if you had your previous paperwork, this was provided to you in the packet of, I believe, October the 26th, which is
Yes.
Frank was just referencing a moment ago. Yeah. And so I don't know whether or not we can do this simultaneously with your, yeah.
On the right.
Is that what you're looking for?
If you go to the next slide, perfect. Yeah, okay. You take a look at your the site plans, and what's depicted up here on the screens right now is what we've proposed in the building plans or site plans that were submitted to the village with our application. And in this instance, the the screen shows, the drawing shows a fenced-in area for the tower and the land below it to accommodate the equipment. And the dimension of that fenced-in area is approximately 58 by 58. So it's 58 feet by 58 feet. And what we did was we went back to the applicant, and they evaluated this, and they gave me a drawing of what they've done on a similar project with a monopole tower. And what they can do in this instance too, and what they've done here, is shrink that fenced-in area, still trying to keep, with the effort of keeping the western boundary of the fenced-in area consistent, and sort of shrinking it towards the west boundary. With the intent of having the initial installation being significantly smaller than what's depicted here in the site plan of 58 feet by 58 feet. I just handed out a drawing to you, and it's a monopole project that the applicant has done at another, in another community. And in this instance, the initial footprint of the installation is approximately 25 feet by 16 feet. And so when you're looking at that I did the math, and it's just, I think, a little under 700 square feet compared to, over the 3,400 square feet or 3,300 square feet that the 58 by 58 would take up. Now, the thinking is that 25 by 16 could accommodate the tower and the space necessary for one carrier, and in this instance, that would be T-Mobile. But then, as additional tenants come onto the site, the intent would be to be more judicious with space and to do what they could do, basically to work with any oncoming tenants to reduce the equipment footprint. So over a period of time, you'd have somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 tenants, but they wouldn't be taking up the 3,600 square feet. It would be significantly smaller. The other thing that the applicant is looking at, and it has some discretion to do so, but not a lot, would be to move the monopole closer to the western boundary of the property, towards the right-of-way. So if you look at the screen, right now that monopole is approximately 29 feet from the fenced-in, from the fence line on the west boundary. And the intent would be to move that closer towards the west boundary. That would allow, greater space over here for development, and in the event that a building were to be built on this property, the tower wouldn't be so close to the building's edge. I'm not sure how much discretion the applicant would have in moving the tower, but there is some, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 feet, if they move it this way, I think would have a significant impact on, reducing the amount of footprint that the fenced-in area would eventually take up.
So the message is really that the applicant would work with staff, would work with
Right.
the village on approval to design something that would be satisfactory, recognizing, that the carriers will be space there, but there's some room for adjustment.
Right.
So I have some comments and questions.
Please, Mr. Simon.
Assuming for the sake of argument, this is approved.
Yeah.
And you have the smallest size available just for T-Mobile. Under more recent federal law, the village essentially has no discretion to deny co-location carriers. So if Sprint comes on, like they've represented in the correspondence we received, there will be additional space on the ground, and we won't have discretion to go through this process again to minimize the size of the square footage that they take up. And so while I recognize that we can limit the size of the area for T-Mobile, because they're the current applicant or companion applicant in front of us, we lose some discretion for co-location applicants because the federal government's taken away that discretion. Once a monopole is built, and that's a base station, they basically said we cannot deny co-location applicants. So we would have to come up with a condition that applies from the beginning that is designed to minimize the impact. So instead of relying upon you exercising your commercial discretion in the future. So that would be one concern that we'd have to address, is that condition. Is it possible to, instead of having separate compounds, have one master shed developed where all the carriers can share space inside one building?
Yes.
Yeah,
That would further minimize the space, I think.
I think that that is something that we could look at, or at least we could set the first installation up to be expanded, in the future.
So I'm familiar with how
Yeah.
these sites are built, and there's a lot of open space.
Sure.
Whereas if you stick everything in one building, you eliminate that open space and you consolidate the site.
Right, yeah. And I think we could, I've seen these done in a manner that you've just described, but they're typically done in sort of this modular fashion where it's almost like Legos, where, the next person comes in and sort of attaches their equipment area basically to the previous one that's already
Eliminate
there.
dead
Yeah,
space.
yeah,
But we could agree to that.
yeah.
If there were an approval as a condition, that we
Yeah.
could construct something similar to that, or what you have in mind. I'm clear on
Right.
what you're talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It really reduces the footprint.
And then my recollection from the staff report was that one of the concerns about the orderly development of this area is the change of topography. I think, is that right, Brian? And where the tower is located is the highest point in that cutoff properties area. And that one way to facilitate the development of the tower without frustrating development nearby is to make the topography more even and less, less grade.
Sure.
Is it possible to lower the grade where the original tower is located so it's easier to develop around it?
When you say lower the grade, you mean flatten everything?
So that, yeah,
So
from the
that-
curb to the back of the property is more level instead of this, instead of,
You mean a pitch? I
yeah.
I
that
don't
make
know the
sense?
answer to that. Maybe Mr. Fisher is here, and he may be able to shed some light on that.
Mr. Fisher, if you'd be kind enough for the record, just to state your name and address.
Name's Gary Fisher. My home address is 106 Sherwood Drive, Cary.
Thank you very much.
I'm not sure of the exact drop, but I would estimate it at about 6 feet. Now, you're talking about lowering the property line, which would increase the hill behind it where ComEd is and make us more even with Manfred, or Strites Auto, or All Marine and all that down there. How far do you think you'd have to drop it?
I think that if,
Because then it even drops more when it reaches the Burger King. There's like 4 levels. ComEd, where Gage Grinding was, where Strite and Manfred is, and then where Burger King is. So it's quite a hill.
yeah, I'm not as familiar with the topography. I don't
Yeah.
have a topographic map here.
Right.
I just know that the staff report indicated that leaving the hill there would make it more difficult to build retail development around it. And so if the grade was more slight, and it would facilitate an easier redevelopment along the frontage of Route 14.
I'm pretty sure it could be dropped a couple feet, because there is a hill going from Route 14 up to the corner of the property. There is an increase of a hill there, but it's not as, even at the end of the driveway where it reaches Route 14, there's still a 2-3 foot drop there, because we built a retaining wall along there to separate us from Manfred's at our driveway. And all the way down to Route 14, almost at the very end, it's level. So there's a drop all the way down. So I don't know, I'm not a landscaper or whatever, but it could be dropped.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Mr. Simon, before we move forward, did you have any other questions?
No.
Okay.
Can we want questions
Well, I guess
following
that's
that later on, or?
We are flexible here, gentlemen, so we can stop and pause on the third question first. And
Okay.
if you have questions, Mr. Jasper, why don't you go?
We're concerned about redevelopment of this cutoff property. And if I recall correctly, you've got an odd-sized lot on the property. So therefore, for there to be any redevelopment, it's probably going to take at least two of the property owners to get together to, develop that property. In all likelihood, 3, 4, or maybe 5, in order to put something in there that's probably viable and meets the plan that we've got for that corridor. So in order for that to happen, the tenants on those properties are going to have to give up their contractual right to that property, or there's something in their lease already that allows the property owner to move them out, to cancel the lease and move them out. Rather than sitting here talking about whether we change elevation or we move it closer or we lower or we shorten the lot size, why don't we just concentrate on a contractual relationship that says that if that property gets developed and other tenants, or however we want to, I'll leave that to the lawyers, but you're going to lose your lease and you're going to have to relocate. In other words, we're going to kick you out if we decide to redevelop that cutoff property. Because in order for that to happen, like I said, at least Burger King is only a tenant on that property. They're going to have to leave.
So, Mr. Jasper, would you allow me to make a comment to this?
Sure.
I think.
It's an idea, maybe harebrained, but
And we appreciate that, and I appreciate that, Pat. But I think, as it relates to our discussion this evening, I think it's important just to stick to what the request is for tonight. I understand 100% where you're coming from. I know we're trying to meet common ground.
well, their request, and part of what we're talking about in order for them to get a positive recommendation on this request is to meet this requirement of being able to redevelop that cutoff property. And they're approaching it from, the fact of, their little corner of the property. What I'm saying is that, in my opinion, if that property were to be developed, okay, it's going to be a fairly big undertaking. It's going to take more property owners than just the property owner for this property. Mm-hmm. And there are going to be other tenants that are going to be forced out.
Wouldn't you say that the village has already started redeveloping that property when they allowed a Burger King to go in there?
They
You just
just-
let them in there a year ago, you're not going to throw them out of there.
Looking from a,
If somebody's coming in that's going to bring more money into the village,
You'll throw
who
them
knows what, I'm not doing it. I'm sitting here only worried about, planning and zoning.
Okay.
All right, gentlemen, so I think Mr. Simmons has a comment about this.
just to interject, from a development standpoint, obviously there's multiple parcels that are in this corner, the southwest, or the western corner of Janus Cutoff and Route 14. So there's 5 parcels that comprise the property or the cutoff property area. Any redevelopment may require inclusion of 2 or more of those parcels. The goal from the village's perspective in the comprehensive plan, it looks at a more cohesive development, that it may happen at piece parcel like it has thus far with the Burger King going in. There may be opportunities for 3 other parcels to combine to redevelopment. And yes, there'll be multiple owners in there that all would have to participate in that project or sell to be able to be part of that project. So depending on the scale of the project or development that does occur and what parcels are included, the comment from staff was to ensure that this proposed installation would not impede whatever future development may occur. And looking at the grades might be one area that you can make a modification now to accommodate what the existing contours of the surrounding properties are, so that as they do develop or if parcels do combine for redevelopment, that this structure would not restrict that future development from occurring and would allow for cross connection or connectivity between the parcels for traffic circulation as an example.
Right, and that's my concern as well. And what I'm saying is that parcel is so small.
Correct.
That whole area there is so small that anything in there is going to more than likely impede what a developer is trying to do, whether it's traffic, whether it's parking, whether it's their own service buildings or whatever, may be back there.
Well, and if I can echo you, Pat, I mean, in just looking at the parcels that we have on the current map up here, this is really the backyard to the 2 front parcels on 14. So you would have to have more than one come in just to put anything. It'd have to be more than one parcel for sure to redevelop that area.
All I was saying was, the main thing that I was trying to say is that rather than come up with a immediate solution, construction related, excavating, lowering the size of the footprint, focus on a contractual solution.
Well, again, Mr. Jasper, I think this is the petitioner's request, and so maybe as a suggestion, gentlemen, if we can give the floor back to the petitioner, because I think that was question 3 of 2 more to go.
And anyone else have questions about the redevelopment piece?
Yeah, but I think, I'll be flexible with this. Typically, what we do is we have them present. We may ask questions back, but we seem to be, they're going to ask the one question, we're going to respond back. So I guess if you're asking Mr. Simon if you want to respond to any of those comments, Mr. Long or Mr. Carter, you're welcome to.
As far as the grading issue, I think that we can address that. If that is something that is of concern, we'd be glad to have our client, during the construction phase or in the building permitting phase, evaluate, what type of grade change can occur at the property to, I guess, from what you're saying, to set the stage for development and possibly also, it may be the case that it may have to occur anyways for drainage anyways. So I think we can evaluate that, don't you think?
I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah.
And I guess to the redevelopment point, I've been involved in a number of tower sites where the property is redeveloped. Most recently, municipal complex was converted into a high school up in the city of Oak Creek outside Milwaukee. They made the decision there, they actually talked about relocating the tower on the property, and they made the decision there to go around the tower. But that's not to say that the carriers in that case weren't open to discussing relocation. It's just tough to do at this point in time because we're speculating on different properties being sold and coming together in a development. One benefit always that a tower like this adds is, there's going to be income coming to the property, which is attractive to any purchasers as well. But it isn't unheard of if there's a redevelopment, and even if the parcels aren't combined, for a tower to be relocated down the road. But that typically is done, with some incentive going back and forth between the owner of the property and the tower operator.
Would that, just to that effect, would that be a condition that the petitioner be open to if redevelopment of 3 parcels or something like that were to occur, that as part of the redevelopment offer, that might be an option, that relocation of that tower could be something that would be explored or pursued if impacted that future development?
Yeah, typically what that would involve is there would be a guaranteed period of time that the tower would be, because they want to you don't want to build the tower and a year from now have to say, well, no, it's going to be redeveloped.
Mm-hmm.
So normally it's, at least 1 or 2 terms under the lease. And then there would have to be some sort of alternate location on the property that would be made available to house the tower.
Perhaps the way to solve this without having a term limitation is to say that should redevelopment occur in a way that conflicts with the location of the tower, the new buildings will allow for co-location of the antennas on the building as a substitute for the monopole, as a frame to hold the antennas on, where they serve, so they can continue to provide service. Does that make sense?
If you anticipate the buildings are going to be the height of the tower or taller.
I don't know. I don't know where the buildings are going to go because obviously we're
I
trying to
think
look into a crystal ball.
Yeah, I think it might make sense if you knew, but you don't know what you're going to get there in terms of building. You could get 1-story retail complex, which isn't going to, that won't work from a coverage.
Right. So, gentlemen, Mr. Graziano, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm having trouble wrapping my head around why we're so worried about the redevelopment of these properties. There's, as I understand it, there's 5 parcels. I believe at least 4 have either a structure or an ongoing business on them. And across the street, you got a huge piece of property. Across Route 14, there's a piece next to CBS. There's another 3 parcels down the road by 2nd Street. Got all this open property that's just waiting to be developed. Why are we worried about redeveloping 5 parcels that are already occupied?
The comprehensive plan for the village indicates that the goal for that property is to be redesigned and redeveloped. And so for one of the conditions of satisfying, that they need to satisfy to obtain a conditional use, is that it doesn't impede the orderly development and that it's consistent with the future
But the
land use
properties
plans.
are developed already.
But the comprehensive plan, to Mr. Simon's point, does point to redevelopment of those properties. So it's looking at future use that would.
So the
be more
comprehensive
appropriate.
plan says that those properties aren't developed correctly, and the village wants them redone
Correct.
eventually.
Correct. Yeah, there are existing properties that were developed prior to existing codes. They were outskirts of town when they were developed. The comprehensive plan is looking at not just that property, but also the Selkie property across the street and kind of redeveloping the area for more commercial activity. So you do have commercial uses that are in the area now. The subject property used to be an industrial use, so you are starting to see a transition of uses there currently. But the comprehensive plan recommends or has recommendations to try to develop a more cohesive redevelopment of that corner, similar to what's occurred across the street where CVS is currently at. There used to be several buildings in that corner, gas station, office building, bank as well, that redevelopment occurred and has now created additional commercial opportunities across the street. So it would be a similar type of development that the comprehensive plan is proposing or seeking for this corner as well.
The comprehensive plan also would like to see those other 3 empty properties developed.
Correct.
I don't understand the concern.
So, gentlemen, as a suggestion, I think what we'll do is we'll turn the floor back over to you, Mr. Long. I know you were trying to address the 3 questions that were previously presented. I know we took the 3rd one first.
Yeah.
That leaves 2 more. But before we leave this issue, I do have an obligation just to ask our other members, since we're doing a little bit differently, do you have other questions about what was just
Point number
presented?
3.
Yes, thank you. That was presented first. No? Okay, so back over to you, Mr. Long.
Okay, thank you. So the second item we'd like to do is the first item that's depicted on the screen, which is a discussion on the ComEd co-location. And have you all had a chance to read our letter today? Mhm. Okay. The T-Mobile, who's the anchor tenant on our proposed tower, believes that the co-location on the ComEd power line support structures is not the best or even a feasible alternative to co-locating. And there are several reasons why ComEd, or why these ComEd power support structures are infeasible. I think the first one is, and let me get the letter here, but the first one is the fact that when you install antenna on a power line support structure, the structural capacity is much less than what you find on a monopole tower or any type of telecommunications tower. These power lines support structures were not designed to accommodate antenna, and as a result, what you typically find is that the loading of the equipment is much less than what you can accomplish in putting on a tower. As a result, the functionality, the operability of the site on a ComEd facility or any type of utility facility is far less than what you find in a situation with a standard installation on a telecommunications tower. The second thing is that there's concerns that T-Mobile has with regard to repairing equipment that's installed on a tower or a power line support structure. And that is typically there's access issues that have to be worked out in order to get to the structure in times of a network failure or of a site failure. And the downtimes are too great for what T-Mobile would tolerate, and it's typically those response times are far greater than what T-Mobile experiences when they're going to service their antenna on a regular telecommunications tower. That being said, there's some other concerns as well, and T-Mobile is, in looking at these things, they've known that the village has not always been receptive to having antenna installed on the ComEd power structures or power line support structures. I think in a few years back, the village denied an application for co-location on such a structure. So, in looking at sort of the totality of all these circumstances, T-Mobile believes that this is not the right home for its antenna, that these ComEd support structures.
The other, from a practical standpoint, we question too, and I'm looking up there like I'm going to see the power lines,
Yeah.
so I'll stop looking at the screen. There's a question of how they would access the ComEd property because there's no cut in the road to actually access the tower area. ComEd's response with regard to these requests has been essentially non-committal. We hope to have something for you to demonstrate just that, but all you're going to have is our representation that they're non-committal. And as Mike indicated, any installation that could be put on those lines could not be to the extent of the installation that you're going to have on the monopole. So you're still going to have the coverage gap existing. You're still going to have us back here bugging you for solutions to infill that coverage.
Actually, can I dive into that comment you just made? The location of the ComEd tower is less than 100 feet away from the proposed site. And the site that you're proposing is designed to, what the application says is close a coverage gap. Can you tell me honestly that an antenna less than 100 feet away is not going to close the same coverage gap that the proposed tower is going to close?
We aren't talking about just one antenna, though. If you look at the plans that were submitted, there's a number of antennas and different apparatus that are going on the monopole. Those ComEd towers, and that's in Mr. Ramin's sworn statement.
We're talking about T-Mobile though right now.
Right,
We're not talking about any other co-locators right now. We're talking about just T-Mobile.
correct.
And whether or not this can close a gap in coverage for T-Mobile.
The ComEd towers cannot, because you cannot install everything that T-Mobile is proposing to install on the Lend-Lease tower, on the ComEd structures.
Such as?
Such as all the equipment that's listed in the application. I mean, you've got a pull out the sworn statement. I've got the drawings here.
While you're looking, I'm reviewing it. The letter that we received this afternoon doesn't describe the ability for the ComEd location to close the gap in coverage. It's silent on that. It only discusses the accessibility of the tower for service purposes primarily.
Lack of access.
Lack of access. But, if ComEd would allow you to put something on the tower, I imagine they'd also provide you with access, because that would go hand in hand. That goes hand in hand with every lease. When you get a tower, you get an access easement.
The village would allow a road cut
It would be Route
at that
14.
intersection.
Yeah, if there's the previous, when we discussed, there were two applications that have been reviewed in the past for co-location on the ComEd towers, and one that was actually approved by the village was for a tower that was directly next to the site. And that had access that was provided off of Route 14, if I recall correctly.
What you have from T-Mobile in their sworn statement is paragraph 24, due to the structural limitations of these types of towers themselves, that being the ComEd towers, the type and quantity of antennas and associated broadcast equipment that can be installed on such structures is limited, which will cause diminished service as compared to the site. Then it goes on to say, in addition, the challenges associated with working on these types of tower structures and limited line site access in times of service outages and interruptions make Commonwealth Edison tower structures unacceptable as viable co-location options for providing the required level of service to T-Mobile subscribers.
That's T-Mobile's position. The point that's on the screen there was not a physical option supported by ComEd. Now, forgetting everything else that's being said here about whether it's, you can, engineering-wise, put the equipment up there. Essentially, what you'd be doing was, instead of leasing the land from the current lessor, you would be releasing it from ComEd. And ComEd would then be receiving the fees and the income associated with that lease. So it would be potentially a fee income, most profit, almost no expense, to ComEd. And what I'm hearing you tell me is that in your conversations with ComEd,
I haven't
within,
had conversations with ComEd. That's
has
what I'm telling you.
anybody had conversations with
There
ComEd?
have been no conversations with ComEd on this issue. I don't have a landlord for you.
ComEd would be the landlord.
Right. I don't have a commitment from ComEd to bring to you tonight.
I know, and but what I'm saying is you've had conversations with ComEd as to whether you could actually place your equipment on the tower.
At this location,
Yeah.
I have not had conversations with ComEd. I have one landlord. It would be as if T-Mobile came to you and asked to put antennas on your house and you said no, and the village said, go to Mr. Jasper's house, that's where you're going to locate.
But you don't have a no from ComEd.
I don't.
Yeah.
All right, can I?
So
take
we
a-
don't know whether ComEd, the answer to question number one
So
has
let me-
not been answered. We
let me-
don't know if ComEd would
let me
be
try
an
to take
interested
a stab at this,
landlord.
Pat. So I'm going to come forward to your questions to Mr. Simon and Mr. Jasper, but I do just want to step back, gentlemen, and we're going to be discussing now question one. We seem to be presenting and asking on question one now, correct?
Yes,
Okay, you comfortable with that, Mr. Lund?
yes.
Okay. So I just want to step back for a minute because as Mr. Simmons had articulated in his opening comments, this is our fourth meeting. We had extended from the 26th to the 9th of November. We met in person on the 14th. We articulated a request to deliver back responses to these questions. Do you agree?
Yes.
Thank you. So we received a memo from yourselves today, and as I mentioned earlier, I received it personally at about 4:21 PM. All the gentlemen at this table are working as you are. I recognize full well, Mr. Lung, Mr. Carter, that you're busy probably with other accounts, other clients. I respect that. But what I'm trying to understand is that since the 14th of December, when we had that agreement to find a common ground, November 9th, thank you. You've had time to respond to this prior to tonight, and I'm sincerely trying to understand why we received this today, as opposed to maybe a week ago. We all receive our packets about a week in advance of the meetings in an effort for all of the ZPA members to be fully briefed and prepared. So I'm sincerely trying to understand that question, so you can pause for a second. With regard to your comment about, this is your page 2, Mr. Carter. It's the last paragraph, last sentence under item number 2. We know the village has denied permits in the past. That was about 12 years ago, at the village level, at the elected village level, just so you're aware. It was about 12 years ago. I double-checked it for you this evening. It was 2006. So I guess one of the things that I was trying to understand from the memo, Mr. Carter, is that the gentleman started to speak to this. I think I heard that the driving factor for your T-Mobile request is coverage. Is that still accurate tonight?
I think the driving force behind the application and what we're trying to accomplish is that we're trying to develop a site within the village that's acceptable to telecommunications carriers. And, T-Mobile has indicated that they find our site superior to, any other co-location option in the village. And in fact, some don't work because they're outside the search ring. I'll admit that, the physical location of the ComEd structure is in the search ring. However, I don't think you'll get T-Mobile to go on the ComEd structure. I just don't. I don't think that that's going to happen.
That's a fair comment, Mr. Long, and I understand that. But I think what I'm trying to understand, and I just want to confirm with you, because there's other elements in the memo that don't necessarily speak to this, but I think the driver in the original request is coverage for T-Mobile.
The driver for the application and for the tower is certainly to provide the coverage, filling the coverage gap for the anchor tenant T-Mobile, yes.
And I think what some of the other gentlemen were talking about, Mr. Carter and Mr. Long, is that, at least the way I was reading the memo, it goes on in quite some depth about the cost of potentially using ComEd facilities or making other arrangements. And I'm trying to balance that with, I'm on your page 3 now, it goes into quite some detail on the cost, besides a 325% rent increase. So it talks specifically about the additional cost that T-Mobile might be required to pay to use existing structures. So that's why I'm trying to understand, is the driver cost, or is the driver, what's the driver here?
I think that for the applicant, it's the driver is providing a facility that's acceptable to telecommunications companies, that is in a strategic location, that allows at least one wireless carrier that we know of to accomplish its coverage objectives, to fill a service gap in the village in the most efficient means possible. I think the cost issue is something that's germane to T-Mobile.
I understand,
Yeah.
Mr. Long.
Yeah.
I sincerely understand and appreciate
Yeah.
that.
To finish or restate what he was trying to say is it's an economic decision as well as a physical property decision. And I think that's what, when I read it, that's what, T-Mobile was trying to show us, was that anything else is significantly economically worse for them from a business perspective.
I agree, Mr. Jasper, and I guess I'll come back to Mr. Long and Mr. Carter, because I'm personally still trying to understand why we're receiving this communication tonight. I think Mr. Carter said he hasn't really had any communication with ComEd, even though we agreed at the last meeting that we would try to resolve as best we could some of these questions, and you were taking those away, and that's why we agreed to continue the meeting. So I'm sincerely trying to understand, did it really take to this afternoon to get this information?
Well, to get no information, I mean, you're asking for a negative. We've given you everything that we have, so it's not as though we're springing another proposal to put up another tower at the 11th hour. We're telling you this is what we have. These are the arguments that we have, which are essentially what we had at our first meeting.
That's the point.
The
Yeah,
letter
yeah.
did have to go through Lend-Lease and through T-Mobile for approval, and several different layers of approval. So we worked to get it out to you as quickly as we could.
So, Mr. Graziano, please.
What I'm having trouble with, like I had trouble before, I'm reading item number 1 on this list from November 9th. It says, determine if co-location on adjacent towers was not a physical option supported by ComEd. That's number 1. I'm hearing Mr. Carter say, oh, we haven't talked to ComEd. Why not?
What I'm saying is, I don't have a response from ComEd.
You've contacted them, but they haven't responded?
Our site acquisition has contacted them, and they've been non-committal, as indicated in the last paragraph on page 3 of our letter.
Do you know of any other locations that ComEd has allowed co-location on their towers? Is that something that ComEd does, again, when economically feasible to them?
in the village or,
Anywhere.
I mean, I can represent that there probably are installations on ComEd towers. I can't cite to any off the top of my head.
Mr. Simmons might have some insight here, gentlemen.
If Mr. Jasper might recall from our last hearing in November, there were 2 installations that are on the boundary between Kane County and Cook County on Algonquin Road, where a few miles south of the subject property where there are 2 co-locations that have been installed. I do have images in the slide projection if you wanted to go back to that, but there are local examples of that where they have allowed it previously.
So, engineering-wise, they can install facilities on their towers. Whether they want to or not is a different question. And what the petitioners are telling us is that they couldn't get to the person to give them that would give them an answer.
So can we explore that a little bit further, Mr. Carter? Because I think that's an important question. I think Mr. Graziano encapsulated it very well. When you say non-committal, did you or anyone in your firm have a discussion with ComEd? Or so how do we know they're non-committal? By the fact that they didn't respond? Is that how we're interpreting that?
No one in our firm has had any conversations with ComEd concerning this project or any other cell installation that I'm aware of. Lend-Lease's real estate agent had attempted on multiple occasions to contact ComEd to explore this following the latest meeting. I'm told that there was a non-committal response, or at the first acknowledgement to those repeated requests came fairly recently, as in like maybe Friday of last week. But it was not committal in anything. It was an acknowledgement.
We're reviewing your request?
Well, no. If to pursue and to actually make a determination if the towers could hold the equipment, you'd have to submit a complete set of design drawings like you have tonight. So we haven't done that.
So I think that's kind of the crux of question number 1, gentlemen. I think you'll appreciate that you remember well that we talked about this very specific issue. And I think we found ourselves in a similar circumstance now that we thought there was going to be some dialogue between someone and ComEd around this idea. Could it work? And it sounds like, if I'm hearing you correctly, non-committal means there's been no meaningful dialogue whatsoever around question 1 from our previous meeting on November the 9th, if I'm recalling that meeting correctly, gentlemen. Because I think that was one of the requests that we had made. So I don't have any questions further about question 1, but that was why we agreed, if I'm recalling correctly, gentlemen, why we agreed to continue, to give yourselves some time to go back and further pursue question 1.
Well, and I can represent, because I was the one pushing, I was pushing the real estate representative to get something from ComEd. We didn't have anything. We did. We would turn it over to you, but I've got nothing more than if you say, go and talk to property owner B, you talk to A, talk to B, and he picks up the phone and says, well.
So, gentlemen, I guess the question is, I'll be the one to try to take a kick at the can on this. We're sincerely trying to reach some common ground with yourselves. But I think the reason why we kept an open mind is we said we would, and I think I remember saying to yourself, Mr. Lung, we would need specific responses to these because you're well aware of the information, as we all have from the staff reports. And so I guess you could have requested a continuation from the last meeting to further to tonight because we don't really have any information about question 1. I'm not putting any blame on anyone, Mr. Carter. It's just the agreement that we achieved at our last meeting. All right, so we won't beat that one up anymore unless others have questions about question one. It's second.
No.
All right, so why don't, with your agreement, Mr. Lung, we can move on. If you're concluded with question one, we can move on to question two as it's stated on the list there. Sure.
So the last question was filling the service gap with additional co-locations. And, you know, I think the simple answer to break it down is if we put antennas on the ComEd lines, and if we put antennas on your water tanks, and if we put antennas on the SBA structure, and we put antennas on the CBS building, and we put some small cells along the roadway, you'd have the coverage gap would be filled. But that gets to the cost and the economics of it. And, you know, when companies look at supplementing and improving service in an area, they look at the need, and they've identified Cary in this area as a need based upon customer service complaints and what have you. To fill that need, there isn't an unlimited budget. So there's a set number of dollars, and there's a set number of dollars they're willing to invest in Cary and in your neighboring communities. We had looked at, I think the most viable means to fill the coverage gap would be the 2 water tanks. The SBA tower is outside of the coverage ring, and it won't do anything. We wouldn't be here proposing a new tower. They'd go on the existing one. The ComEd lines, as we've discussed, aren't an option at this point for the reasons that we won't go back into it, but T-Mobile doesn't feel that they're an option. If you combine the coverage on both water tanks, or if you combine the installation on both water tanks, you're going to improve coverage because those water tanks kind of straddle the area in question. The problem with that is to put the installation on both water tanks, you're looking at a 325% increase in what they would pay for just this one monopole installation. And that's, from an economic standpoint, it just doesn't make sense. So if that's, and I don't think, with all due respect to the village, I don't think that the village can deny on the basis of, well, if you fill up and you put your installations on our water tanks, you'll have ideal coverage. And the code, as we note in the letter, your code doesn't talk about doing any sort of alternative analysis either. And we're happy to do that, and I think we have. But that boils down to a money situation. And also, when you're looking at paying a 325% premium in rent, we identified some of the issues that are generally there with water tank leases. And one of those is, it sort of goes back to the issue that we had with the ComEd lines. If you stock up a water tank with installations, the water tank right now might not support it from a structural standpoint, but who knows how these installations are going to be modified in the future, and if structurally the water tank isn't going to be capable of handling it, because water tanks are designed to distribute water. The primary purpose isn't like this monopole. It's not to hold carrier cell equipment. So there's a concern about what the water tank can and can't accommodate. But then there's also the fact that you have probably 10 major tower companies in the United States who have established relationships with these carriers. So their leases are very carrier friendly. If equipment's damaged, it can be swapped out easily. If there's upgrades in equipment, they know what they're going to pay. The rental rates and escalators are more competitive. There aren't issues with access. So we talked a little bit about access with the ComEd lines and the delay. And again, access, and if lines go down, you're talking, you can be talking safety issues and 911 reliability and to get on the water tank. And we certainly understand that you aren't just going to grant anyone access to your water tanks, but there's a delay there. There's also a very significant cost with repainting the tanks because they've got to remove their equipment, they've got to put up temporary towers. And that, and this figure startles me, but that's a $250,000 cost, the repainting. So from a business standpoint, using those two towers just isn't, it's not a viable option for this to go forward and be a means to address the coverage. One or the other towers, just one tower here or there isn't going to do it either. And for both of them, they can't do it.
Did anyone approach the village to ask what the terms of a lease might be for a new lease? Not looking at the existing leases, because those are separate installations. Did anyone contact the village to see what could be negotiated for T-Mobile on those two towers? Or these numbers are just extrapolated from other leases?
We took those numbers from the two existing leases that we have. And those two existing leases, I'll tell you, they're fair market rates in Chicagoland. I wouldn't expect if we came to you that we would get different pricing on those leases.
I can't speak for the village board because they haven't considered this, so we don't have any input from them. But if they were told, if you charge half the cost for the rent, you'll get new antennas and you won't have a monopole, I don't know what they'll say.
Well,
But there's,
it's less than half, you understand, too.
whatever it is, if all things are equal, you said earlier that the dual installations on the water tower would effectively close the covered gap.
So, Mr. Carter, can I come back? Because I think we are kind of getting to the crux of it, which is a coverage gap. That was the original request. And I recall from our last meeting that there was a discussion about gaining coverage inside of buildings. And so what I'm trying to recall is the coverage gap inside of buildings, or is it when you're driving? Is it both? And do you have order of magnitude on either side of that?
I can speak to that. Our understanding from T-Mobile, and I went through it at the last meeting, was that T-Mobile wants to improve its data coverage both outdoor and in indoor situations. And so when they look at this site, it's there's a when you look at it, you are looking at what can we cover from a strategic location. And in this instance, you've got the village, you've got a population density, you've got a need for not only people outside from the point of view of being in vehicles traveling along 14, but in addition to that, T-Mobile is also trying to accomplish and improve their indoor coverage as well.
Okay.
So it's both outdoor and indoor.
Yeah, that's my recollection. I just didn't know if it was more of one area or another. I don't think you know either. Yeah, it's both. Okay. So, gentlemen, let me give everyone an opportunity to ask questions of the petitioner on question 2. So we're at about,
Wait, I did have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I forget the gentleman that was with you before, but he had stated, or I thought he'd stated, maybe I'm incorrect in my recollection of it, but that hitting on the two towers would improve it, but it would not close the gap. Was that correct? Or was the two towers would close, or two water towers would close the gap?
I understand it would,
thought
but I don't want to speak for them. I thought I heard the affirmative.
Okay, because, when you said that, I thought that the person from, I forget his name, the gentleman that was with you, I thought he said the two towers would potentially close portions of the gap, but not all of it. I'm trying to remember the red diagrams that we had.
The difference in rent with two towers versus the monopole is $2.8 million more.
So there's the cost issue and then there's the coverage issue. That's what I was trying to get at earlier.
And the structural integrity, we don't know the structural integrity of those tanks.
Yeah, but think that through rationally. A water tower is built to hold how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of gallons of water? And what does a gallon of water weigh?
7.2 pounds.
There you go.
No.
So it's meant to, you put all that water up there, that tower's supposed to hold that up. You're telling me that that tower holding all that water can't handle another 200 pounds of antenna?
Yeah.
That they're that delicate that,
Village of
that extra 200
Village
can
of
topple the
Cedarburg,
tower?
Wisconsin, you can check out their website now. Their water commission, their tank is failing. They're decommissioning it. It can't hold any more antennas, and they're looking to put up a monopole. I don't design them. If you could, I think you could make a lot of money selling them to municipality. But beyond the structural, you're talking $2.8 million and lease terms.
Right.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams, any questions, sir?
It obviously comes down to coverage, as you're trying to improve on, I mean, if we don't agree to anything, what do we go back to? Are people, I mean, it comes down to coverage and money, but if nothing happens, if the monopole doesn't go up and they decide not to do it because it costs too much money, the customers are going to go back to what they have right now. I don't know what the negative, I don't know how bad it is. Obviously, we talked about the maps, and the maps showed that everything was covered, but then we broke it down to what it really was. And if it was that bad, it would be worth it, right? I mean, if people were not getting coverage and T-Mobile was like, this is an issue, the amount of money to solve a problem goes up versus, just generalizations. So, if we're trying to figure out if it can work with ComEd, if it can't, I've been reading that T-Mobile says no. Well, T-Mobile says it's going to be bad because it's OSHA standards and this happens and this. So apparently it's happened because they have information on it and it's been done before. So if it's been done before, there was something was that bad where they had to do it because it was expensive. The easy option is this, and I don't know, future development, same point, Jesper. It's the future comprehensive plan is there for a reason, and we want to move forward with that. If we don't have a plan, and then we just start doing things, then we're not making sense. So it's again, I'm trying to grasp where we're at with the plan for the future, but maybe one that makes sense right now for better coverage. And we're not reliable for the money, so it's what is T-Mobile? What do they feel it's worth to do? My 2 cents.
So gentlemen, can I just pause here for a minute? I'm thinking of our friend Joan here. I just want to make sure that everybody's comfortable. There's no need for a break at this moment, gentlemen. Everyone's comfortable with moving forward? Okay, thank you, Joan. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, so thank you, Mr. Williams. Did you have anything further you wanted to comment on?
No.
Okay. Mr. O'Loughlin,
I'm good.
you're okay? Eric? Yeah.
Are we discussing or questioning?
Well, we're not finished with question 2 yet.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that the petitioner has an opportunity to address any other items that they so choose at this point. Because once we close this part of the testimony, we'll give one more kick at the can for public comment. Then we'll obviously review it again internally here.
If I may say something here, Mr. Carter and I are here before you representing a tower construction company that makes its money managing wireless infrastructure. And, in its work with T-Mobile, as well as other carriers, they've got to the point where they have a proposal that is something that is appealing not only to T-Mobile, but now it looks like Sprint may be, interested in co-locating on the site as well. And, if you ask the people that design water tanks, if you ask people that design the power lines, antennas don't belong on those things. communications antennas belong truly on towers. And, the goal is to find a location for the wireless carriers to be able to put their equipment on it and operate it most efficiently so that, the customer gets the best user experience possible. That can be accomplished best from, a communications tower rather than a water tank and/or a power line support structure. So, please understand, the reason we've been going through this exercise is that, at least for purposes of T-Mobile, we believe that this is the best and most efficient and unobtrusive way for T-Mobile to close their coverage gap and accomplish their coverage improvement needs here within the village. And then, in addition to that, as a result of, this tower, that it is gaining interest from, other wireless carriers, as well as evidenced by that letter from Sprint that we have in the record. So,
Thank you, Mr. Long. Before we close this part.
and then lastly, our efforts in trying to shrink the parcel of the fenced-in compound that would, enclose the tower and any type of equipment that's placed at the base of the tower, that's done in an effort to remain sort of a long-term piece of the communications infrastructure of this community. We don't want to interfere with the future development of the property, and I think in looking at the one or two schematics in the long-term development plan, if we are successful and able to shrinking down that compound, it looks like we will stay out of the way of any, future development of the, of the crossover properties. Or, I'm sorry, the cutoff properties.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But before we conclude, I think there may be one or two.
The cost of moving it, right? So you did say that it's possible, and you guys have done that in the past. So that's not that's not a huge I mean, what are you looking at here? I mean, it's just relocating. It's not is it building half a building a new one, or I mean, what are we?
The cost of
Let's say it goes in there, and we say, listen, and if redevelopment comes, you have to agree to put it in the best place for redevelopment. What is, to you guys, to the T-Mobile, whoever's paying, what is the cost-ish? I mean,
a monopole would, and then the relocation of all a new monopole and the relocation of the equipment onto a new monopole and the decommissioning of the existing one would run somewhere in the neighborhood of about $200,000.
which is what percentage of, so it's basically all brand new? I mean,
Yes, you'd have to build a whole brand-new tower.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's, okay, so it's really not moving, it's just, okay.
Gentlemen, anyone else for the petitioner at this time? So gentlemen, I want to say thank you. What we're going to do now, unless you have any other comments, we're going to close this part of the meeting. We're going to open it up to public comment, and you can see we have a rather large crowd gathered here. But we will give the benefit to Mr. Fisher. If you have any other comments, Mr. Fisher, that you would like to offer?
Well, to answer your question about the need for coverage, last time I was in the meeting, I said you didn't want to come to my shop, you want to go downtown Cary to my daughter's shop. I can show you where they had to put amplifiers in because there's definitely a need. I feel like I'm in Groundhog Days here. We ask the same questions over and over every time I come here. I think I agree with James Grazio. What's going on? If we got an aesthetic problem, I don't think so. With all the towers behind it and everything, everybody I talk to laughs about it. Is it a development problem? Maybe, but if you lived in this town all your life like I have, you know there's certain people over there that aren't going to move without the National Guard coming in. So that, and then, like Nick says, with all the other property around here, that corner ain't going to develop for a very, very long time. I mean, we'll all be gone. The other thing is the Who wants the money? Who wants the money from the cell tower? I don't care. I've called the village and offered the property to the village. Technically speaking, if you do the math, over 30 years, if it develops into a 4-tier tower, maybe $700,000, plus you still own the property. I got an offer right now on the property, I don't know how serious it is, for 200 grand. I'll take it. I'm going to take it if I don't hear something soon, if the guy's serious. I mean, I just don't understand what's going on. If it's all about the money and the greed, take the property, make me an offer. I don't care. I can't build anything on it because everything I try to build on it's going to be a problem. I wouldn't literally build a doghouse in this town anymore. I've been through a lot in this town. But not trying to piss anybody off, but I've had it. So I'm not fighting anybody on it. I didn't tell these people to come to me and offer me a cell tower. They just approached me. They said that's where we got to put it. There's a grid. It's A, B, C. You know, you got to put it here or it ain't going to work. I don't know why we spend an hour and a half every month last year you guys let the thing fly through. It flew through. Then we got to the village and it didn't quite make it. Now, if there's a big plan that's come up between now and then that they want that corner and everybody's afraid to let it go, maybe, I don't know. But they should be realistic because they ruined the corner by putting Burger King there. I've said that before. Burger King's dependent on me to give them parking. The whole thing is a mess. So I just wanted you guys to know that I'm willing to just give up on the whole thing. And if you guys are worried about where to put this thing so you can make the rent off of it, consider buying the property. Then you can do what you want with it. You can get the income for the next 30 years, and you can put a building on it if you want. Get the Masons to move, they'll move. I don't know about Manfred's because their owners are in Chicago or Florida now, but I do know that Mr. Strite is going to be a big problem for you. Has been in the past, and it will be in the future. So it's up to you guys, you know. If this thing doesn't, they can't go on forever. They can't afford to send lawyers here, you know, every month or every year from Indianapolis or from Milwaukee or wherever. And I'm sure the village of Cary is spending a lot of money on lawyers too. I don't know if you got a lawyer on duty all the time or if he just gets paid when he works or how it is, but it's costing the village people a lot of money. Probably almost as much money as it would cost to buy the property. And you guys buy property over there and by the bank and then nobody can even use it. They can't even sell it. It's not worth half of what we paid for it in this town. So, I mean, I don't know why this is such a big issue. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fisher. So, gentlemen, I think we've been at this now a long while. And what I do need to do is I need to step back for a moment now with Mr. Simon and Mr. Simmons because when I originally read the motion, that was about the time that we agreed to continue it from the last case. So I need to understand formally, gentlemen, if it was a continuation from our last meeting where I read the motion, do I need to go back and reread the motion? And do I also need to modify the motion because we may have discussed some new issues tonight that may be.
I don't recall if there was a motion to approve on the table.
No, we only made the motion to continue. You never made the motion.
Oh, I never have read through the entire motion?
No.
Okay, so
Not that
then the
I'm aware
question
of.
becomes, is that there any, well, I'll read through it and then we'll add to it. Yeah,
If you'll indulge me,
yes, please.
I want to address something that the applicant said in the memo that we received today.
Okay.
About what basis you should make your decision upon in terms of weighing the application. You should base your decision on the standards for a conditional use permit. Okay? Those standards are described in the staff memo. We've emphasized those throughout the hearing tonight about whether or not the building of the tower will be consistent with or not impede the orderly and normal development, and whether it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. There are some other standards, but I don't know if there's been any evidence presented in respect to those. In the event there is a denial, and in the event because of the denial there's a challenge, the challenge would be that the denial has caused a effective denial of coverage, which is this like term of art they use in the federal telecommunications law. If the claim is that our denial has caused an effective denial of coverage, the court will make a two-step analysis. First, they'll evaluate whether or not there's a gap at all. And if there's a gap, they'll determine whether or not there are reasonable alternatives, or whether or not the village is so antagonistic to towers at all that applying for any other location is fruitless. So while we've heard testimony about a gap in coverage and we've heard testimony about alternatives, that testimony and that evidence goes to whether or not a potential denial would be characterized as an unlawful denial under federal law. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the question you're asked tonight is whether or not they meet the conditions for a conditional use permit. And if you say yes, it'll go to the village board and they'll decide. If you say no, they'll go to the village board and they'll decide. But if there's a denial ultimately, the other testimony we heard tonight would be relevant to determining whether or not the denial would stand its ground.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simon. I appreciate it. All right, so as it relates to proceeding, Mr. Simon, I do, and I'm just going to share this with Mr. Simon. It's just the notes from our original October 26th application. So I'm just going to show Mr. Simon that that is in fact the case.
Yeah, I
It is
have,
here.
yes.
Okay, and the motion that I have to read to the ZPA members, someone else wants to read it, is it's quite extensive.
This
So
is
I think
this
I
is
do
the
need.
staff memo you said, right?
Yes.
Yeah, there are two motions in the alternative that are presented.
So I think when we were together last time, Mr. Simon, we agreed that because all of the members had it in front of them, it wasn't necessary to read it. But do you think there's value in me stepping through each and every item because we're recording this, or what's your point of view on this? I don't know if everyone has this actual document with them tonight. This is from October the 26th, gentlemen.
It's page 7 of the original staff report that's dated October 26th.
Yeah, the motion right here.
Does everyone have it?
Yep.
Yes, I do. Okay.
As I read this, page 7, these are not conditions for the conditional use. These are just things that have to be satisfied.
Correct.
So we're at a point now where if we make a recommendation, we also have to come up with any conditions that we might want to.
Yeah.
Right. There's actually two, if I can
This is
clarify,
support
there,
or-
on page 6, the recommendation section of the staff report begins.
Yeah.
And then there is a list of 7, should the ZPA recommend approval of the request, staff would recommend that the approval be subject to
Oh,
those
okay.
following
I should have
conditions.
gone back one page.
That's fine.
Sorry about that.
That's my fault, Mr. Graziano.
Yeah, you got me confused, Mr. Curry.
And the motion that's bolded on page 7, there's, if there's in support of a negative recommendation, there's 6 findings of fact that would be recommended for, as part of, to support the board's decision for a negative recommendation. And if the board supports a positive recommendation, there are 4 additional findings of fact that would be considered into that decision. And that's the bolded sections.
So gentlemen, what I'm going to suggest, and I'm going to give you all a few minutes, I'm going to ask you to go back to your document, and from page number 6, under the recommendation, through page number 7. So there's page number 6 that talks about how the conditional use shall be granted and the terms. So 1 through 6, please read those. And then on the motion, I'd like you to read in support of a negative recommendation, what it says, A through F, and then in support of a positive recommendation, A through D. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to read through those to make sure that there's no confusion about what you're voting on tonight. And I know we've been at this a little while, but I think it's an important part of our discussion. So why don't we take a few moments to read through them?
I'm sorry. Did you get that one? Okay.
You got it?
Hey Frank, what happens if I say so moved?
You can't yet, because I didn't say moved. Well, you could say so moved if, once you finish reading it, and then put the motion on the table. Oh, so these are, okay, gotcha. And these are the conditions. This is the motion based on these conditions, and this is our in support of this.
This is the second to negative, that's no.
No, this is, no,
Support of a negative recommendation.
right.
Support of a positive recommendation.
Those aren't conditions.
Those
are
aren't
findings of
conditions. Your
fact.
conditions are here. These are your findings of fact. Okay.
You all had a chance to read through?
Yep.
Yeah?
Didn't we go to 75 feet? Do I remember, why am I thinking 75?
That was one of the
That was
points
a-
of discussion.
That was a discussion.
We never got kind of the,
So 100 is what it is.
so gentlemen, I think what I'll do is I'll try to call the motion, and then I know we're going to have some discussion about it. So I'm going to do two things. One is that we're going to entertain a motion. This is back to page number 6. We're going to entertain a motion to make the following findings of fact, and those are in support of a negative recommendation, items A through F.
No,
No,
no, that's not the motion.
that's not the motion.
I thought we had
That's your
two.
findings of
No.
fact.
So
I would
it's sort
make
it's
a
sort of a
motion.
it's a two-part approval. It's a two-part decision.
I
Okay?
understand that.
You can decide which way you want to make the ultimate decision, but before you make the ultimate decision, you have to make findings of fact in support of the decision you will recommend.
Which is what we've been doing for the past 4 meetings.
Yes.
So I would make a motion to recommend to the village board the approval of the
Conditional use.
petition for the conditional use, subject to the conditions as listed, numbers 1 through 7 in the staff report, with the exception that where the plans that were submitted are subject to change based on a reduction in size.
I'll second.
All right, so we now have a motion and a second. So is there discussion, gentlemen, on the motion?
Yes. I'd just like to go back through the 3 points that came to the extension or the bringing us to this meeting rather than voting last time. While nothing was given factually to show us what ComEd's position is, I think the fact that we don't see, just on our own recollections, I don't know what the lawyers call that, but when you drive past ComEd high wire lines, you don't see a whole lot of telecommunications equipment on those lines. And there's a reason for that. Basically, ComEd more than likely doesn't want to or doesn't find it economically advantageous to use their property for such purposes. The co-location, point number 2, very interesting that the gap between what the tower builder, the tower contractor, is willing to collect and rent versus what villages, governmental entities are imposing upon the telecommunications company for their uses. And, I can see why, while putting the equipment on the 2 towers would solve the coverage issue, it's not going to solve and probably makes more of a problem from an economic standpoint for the parties involved. Number one, it cuts out the tower contractor completely, who's brought this petition to us tonight, and increases the cost of doing business for the telecommunications company. So we come down to point number 3, the redevelopment. I stated earlier that if we really want to solve this, we ought to solve it contractually. Rather than going and doing something from a construction standpoint to the land today, because we don't know what the use of the land is going to be in the future, and anything we do can either harm that or improve that, or end up somewhere in between. Contractually, hopefully it would give us the flexibility to solve the problem, if it ever comes about. My third point, which I didn't raise earlier, is the fact that I think this footprint, whether as originally presented or as been shown can be reduced on any kind of development, can probably be built around and left where it's at. So on that basis, just to tell everybody else where I'm at, I'm for this petition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jasper. Gentlemen, any other comments about the motion? So, Mr. Simon, I have a question for yourself because I'm sensitive to this, Mr. Graziano, because as you'll appreciate through the years, we don't always have counsel, we don't always have court reporters, we sometimes do. So I just want to double check that the motion was called from a legal perspective correctly.
Is to restate what I think the motion was. The motion was to recommend approval, motion to recommend approval to the village board of the conditional use permit, subject to conditions 1 through 7 in the staff memo, and subject to the plans changing to facilitate a reduction in the size of the footprint.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
You didn't call the case number, though.
Oh, I did at the
He did at
beginning.
the very beginning of the
Did he?
meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, at the very beginning of the
Okay.
meeting, he did, yeah.
Didn't reread it as part of the, okay.
By the way, you could also close the public portion of the meeting now.
Thank you, Mr. Graziano. It's always keeping me on my toes. Thank you very much. The public portion of the meeting is formally closed. Thank you very much.
So I think did I restate the motion correctly?
Yeah, and
that's
the
way
reason
I
for
read
asking
it.
is that we have items A and B, Mr. Simon, below that on page 7. So I just want to make sure that those items are actually A through D. And did you mention those, Mr. Graziano?
No, I did not, because
Okay.
it's not part of the motion.
It's not part of the motion, those are our findings, those are our findings.
So
Those aren't conditions.
I was going to do two different things. That's why I'm asking the
if
question.
the board votes in the affirmative for the motion that's on the floor, then there will be a second motion to make findings of fact consistent with your recommendation, because they have to go hand in hand.
Also, yeah, okay, I got you. It's going to be a double, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Be a double motion.
Yeah. Okay.
There was no deliberation on topography that was discussed during the hearing.
Right, is that a condition? That's not part of the
That's not,
127?
No.
that's not on the floor right now.
And I guess that's the question, is that do you want to include it as part of this evaluation or?
No, I go along with what Pat said, that you can build around it.
And as the second, I agree.
Okay.
Can we also recommend to the village board that the village buys the property and off?
Well, we can include it in the notes. How's that?
Okay. I understand that.
You ready to go?
Let's do it.
So you want to do a roll call on the second one? Sure. First one?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Commissioner Jasper,
Yes.
Commissioner Kretschmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Laughlin,
Yes.
Commissioner Graziano,
Yes,
Commissioner Williams,
Yes.
Chairman Corey.
Yes. All right. So do you want to go to the second one, Mr. Graziano, since you're on a roll tonight on,
no, I don't have a recommendation on that.
all right. All right. So I think on the second one, we're going to say is that we'll entertain a motion to recommend to the Village Board of Trustees approval of a conditional use for a telecommunication antenna for the property located.
No,
We just did
We
I'm
one.
just
sorry.
did that one. This is the findings of fact.
I'm sorry, gentlemen.
So, motion to make.
Why do we need a motion to,
Board of Finance.
Well, that's why I was trying to separate them, Jim, to keep us in the same line.
I
of
don't
thinking there.
understand the need for a second motion.
there need to be findings of fact in the record.
Right.
Apparently, we've all decided that the findings of fact are consistent with the conditions in our zoning code.
I would have thought we'd done the findings of fact first
Well, that's what I,
and then approved.
Well, I think we needed to figure out if we made it a positive or a negative recommendation, and then it depends then on this. So what we're looking at basically is entertaining a motion to make the following findings of fact in support of the positive recommendation. A, that the proposed use satisfies the standards to qualify for conditional use as stated in the village zoning ordinance by not substantially diminishing or impairing the values of property within the neighborhood, not contributing to an overburdening of municipal services, and is consistent with the policies and future land uses in the village's comprehensive plan. And B, that the proposed use of the property for a telecommunications tower is appropriate for the B2 zone property and is compatible with the surrounding area based upon the adopted recommendations as contained in the Village of Cary's comprehensive plan. Is there two more on your side? No, I missed it. And C, evidence as provided as part of this petition indicates a significant gap in coverage exists within the search area, and the proposed telecommunication tower will adequately satisfy the service needs within the gap. And evidence provided as part of the petition indicates that options for co-location on existing towers or utility structures, such as ComEd power lines or nearby water towers, are not practical and would not adequately satisfy the service needs within the coverage gap area.
Second.
Thank you very much, Frank. I was trying to do that earlier, so thank you.
Why?
I just figured I'd walk around you, boss,
Thank you.
and make the motion.
All right, so gentlemen, do you have questions or comments around that particular motion? So just so we're clear on what we're saying now here, gents, is that this is in support of a positive recommendation. Your previous one was obviously for the conditional use, which was voted for in the affirmative. This is in support of a positive recommendation to send this forward now to the village. Okay? So just so there's no
I still
confusion.
contend that we already did that.
I'm not so sure we
Here,
did.
here.
It's a double motion. Just go with it, Jim.
It's a mirror motion.
It's a mirror motion.
Do you have questions, Mr. Graziano? 'Cause-
No.
You sure?
You want me to repeat my comments that I said earlier?
No, I think we have
We got those
to.
on. Mr. Simon, is there anything you wanted to add? I thought you were trying to potentially comment on this.
No, I'm all right.
All right, thank you.
Did I do
So,
that right?
Without further ado, we'll ask Mr. Simmons to call the roll.
Mr. Jasper,
Yes.
Commissioner Kretschmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Laughlin,
Yes.
Commissioner Graziano,
Yes.
Commissioner Williams,
Yes.
Chairman Corey.
No. So gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience with us as we've worked through this. You have a positive recommendation. I think you know what the process is to stay very close to Mr. Simmons. And I don't know if you would know tonight, Mr. Simmons, when this would go before the village board.
Would likely be scheduled for our first board meeting in February. I don't know the exact date. I can look it up. I'll get it for you.
So I would remind everybody, before we conclude, that you know when you were coming in here, it was raining. And
It's going to be icy going
it's
out.
going to be very icy outside. So everyone, please be careful going home. Before I conclude the meeting, did anyone else have anything they wanted to discuss? All right, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All right, thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned. So happy New Year, everyone. Good luck, gentlemen. Yeah, thank you. Good
Thank you
luck.
for your patience
Good
with
luck.
us as well.